All right. So the last thing we want to talk about before we get into our actual hypothesis testing is some of the different distributions that we're going to be using. And again, these should all look very familiar to you because these all come from what we did in chapter 7. So the three different distributions that we're going to be working on again is related to the different sections of 7.1, 7.2, 7.3 from our chapter 7 confidence intervals. So if we look at our first distribution, when the population standard deviation is known, so if we remember in that case, we were working with Z or tiger or zebra scores for these. And so we've got our Z score is going to look exactly like we have there with our sample mean minus our mu divided by our population standard deviation all divided by the square root of n. If the population standard deviation is unknown or we know the sample standard deviation, then these are our T or tiger scores that we were looking at. And so again, the tiger score looks exactly like the one above, except we're going to swap out the population standard deviation for the sample standard deviation. And then finally, our last one is testing a claim about proportions using our normal distribution. And so if we remember, we had our standard deviation was written this way last time with P and Q inside the square root all divided by N. And so these also went back to zebra scores. So if you remember, we used inverse norm for these, inverse T for this one, and then inverse norm for these. So if we need to find those Z and T scores, we're going to be using either inverse norm or inverse T, depending on whether we're in the 7.1, 7.2, or 7.3 case, which is how these are all going to be broken down. So again, everything we learned in those chapters are going to carry right over into helping us with these different distributions as we go along. All right. So finally, when it comes to drawing our conclusion and trying to figure out whether we're going to reject H naught or fail to reject an H naught is going to come down to this probability that we call the p-value. And so the way that we know is going to be using this. And so I'll show you how to do this using our calculator. And technically we've already done it, but we'll see it in action in 8.4 as an example. And so the way this is going to work is if p is small, we will reject H naught. And so determine what small means is going to be related to the alpha level like we had back in our confidence interval. So if our p is less than our alpha, we're going to reject H naught. And if p is greater than our alpha, then we're going to fail to reject H naught. So that alpha that we found from our confidence intervals is going to be the exact same type of alpha that we're going to use to determine whether our probability is true or false. And so I did give an example. A lot of times the alpha level that we're interested in is 5% or 0.05, but it could be anything really. I mean, well, something pretty small. We wouldn't want an alpha level of like 20% or something. That would be very conducive to trying to test a claim, but we want it to be, 0.05, 0.02, something like that. So, all right. So after this, if you feel pretty confident, we'll dive into some 8.4 and actually set up and solve some hypothesis tests. So good job, everybody. Well done.